Hello everybody, I'm Jeremy Dickinson. Thank you all for watching and welcome to my YouTube channel, Philosophy Clips. In this philosophy clip, I'd like to discuss some prominent challenges to the normative ethical framework, Act-Utilitarianism. And as my guide to discussing these challenges, I'll be using Mark Timmons' moral theory and introduction. The first part of the 6th chapter lays out a couple different kinds of challenges. Now, before we get to those challenges, let me just say a few words by way of introduction. So I'm going to assume that you have a handle on consequentialism as a general normative framework. I'll also assume that you have an understanding of what utilitarianism is as the most common form of consequentialism. But I won't assume that you know what Act-Utilitarianism is, so let me say a few words about that. And then we'll dive into the challenges to the position here. So Act-Utilitarianism. It's a kind of utilitarianism, which means it's a kind of consequentialism, no surprise there. What makes Act-Utilitarianism is the fact that it maintains that there's a direct relationship between what's required of us in every circumstance and the happiness that we are required to promote. In other words, there's no sort of intermediary set of principles or rules, right, that govern us. According to the Act-Utilitarian, in every circumstance, we're obligated, required, morally speaking, to bring about the action that maximizes the happiness of all those who are going to be affected by our actions, including every sentient being. So that's the directness bit that makes Act-Utilitarianism Act-Utilitarianism. Like other forms of utilitarianism, though, Act-Utilitarianism is a maximizing view, meaning that it's a view that tells us that we're to maximize the happiness of all those affected by our actions. Okay, so Act-Utilitarianism's on the table. Hopefully it's understood enough. Now we're in a position to offer some prominent challenges to it. So the first set of challenges to Act-Utilitarianism are couched under the general category deontological challenges. These are challenges related to deontological constraints that we think exist or hold with respect to our actions. The big picture idea here seems to be that in our effort to promote our own good, promote the good of others, there are constraints. There are certain things that we can't do in our effort to secure our own good or secure the good of others. So for example, I can't just go around lying indiscriminately. I can't go around harming other people for the sake of promoting my good or the good of others. Now, the other set of challenges involve thinking about demandingness concerns. Act-Utilitarianism has been deemed too demanding an ethical theory. And we'll see a couple different ways in which it's been considered too demanding. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, because I want to deal with the first set of challenges first. So remember, the first set of challenges have to do with deontological, or what I like to call duty-based constraints. Now, Timmons, he likes to divide these deontological constraints into several different kinds. So there's constraints that involve thinking about justice, and there are constraints of a deontological sort that involve thinking about rights. And then there's this other set that involves thinking about promising. And what Timmons does in order to show us how these deontological constraints work and how they provide a challenge to Act-Utilitarianism is he provides us with cases to think about. So what we'll do is we'll follow the Timmons here and look at a series of cases that are supposed to help us see how the deontological constraints provides challenges to Act-Utilitarianism. And then once we're sufficiently clear there, we'll turn our attention to the demandingness objection. We have enough on our plate in this video to deal with these objections. So let's begin with the objections. Excuse me. Let's begin with the justice constraints. So with justice, there are a couple different kinds of justice, at the very least. There's justice that pertains to thinking about punishment. This is sometimes called retributive justice. And then there's justice related to the distribution of goods, which leads to the apt name distributive justice. And Timmons gives us examples of both kinds of justice constraints that pose problems for act-utilitarianism. So let's consider what I call the right case first. So this will be thinking about retributive justice. And the right case is a case where a town is rioting, all kinds of havoc is being wreaked on the town, so much so that the chief of the town organizes with the other leaders, right, to try to figure out what to do about the rioting. Now, the riots have broke out, we can stipulate, because there have been a series of violent crimes, and the people want blood. They want the leaders to apprehend a suspect, and they want that person convicted. Now, we can imagine Chief with his committee arriving at the act-utilitarian decision to do whatever will maximize the happiness of all in the situation. And they've come to the conclusion that the best thing that they can do is to find an innocent person, frame that innocent person, and then punish that innocent person. Doing so will prevent the riots from continuing, which will preserve the town and maximize the happiness of all in the town. Call this a riot case, and I'm assuming, we'll assume following Timmons here, that our judgment is that, in this case, you can't just punish the innocent person because he didn't commit the crime. It'd be a violation of retributive justice if we were to do so. This is supposed to be a challenge to act-utilitarianism, isn't it? Because it seems like it delivers the wrong result. According to act-utilitarianism, we should find that innocent person, frame him, and punish him. The way the challenge is supposed to go is so much the worse for act-utilitarianism if it delivers that result. That's a strike against it. So that's the retributive justice constraint. What about the distributive justice constraint? Well, here we're to imagine two societies. So here we're going to be talking about the distribution of good, or the goods in societies. We'll talk about society A and B. In society A, there, the goods, happiness, let's be act-utilitarians here, they're evenly distributed. So if you look at group 1 and group 2, which make up all of the groups in society A, happiness is evenly distributed. When you total up, when you aggregate all of the happiness levels in both the groups, 500 apiece, you have 1,000 units of happiness total. Now consider society B and consider the groups there, groups 1 and 2. Here we see that the happiness levels, they're not evenly distributed. So you're going to have here, with respect to group 1, the people who are living high on the hog, their happiness levels are very high. And when we aggregate their levels of happiness with group 1, we see that they're off the charts. Their happiness levels aggregate to 1,300 units of happiness, supposing we could do such calculations. Work with the example. But with group 2 in society B, we note that this group's oppressed. They're mostly very unhappy. In fact, many of them are miserable. And their happiness levels add up when we aggregate them to a negative number, and they're negative 200. So now we take the 1,300 from group 1 and the negative 200 for group 2. Remember, happiness is not evenly distributed. And what do we get? 1100. Now keep in mind, the Act-Utilitarian says, when we act, we always have to act in such a way that we do what? Maximize the happiness of all those affected by our actions. So it looks like the Act-Utilitarian is going to tell us that society B is preferable to society A. Here's the response. Not so. It looks like what we'd want to say, given our considered judgments, is that group or society 1 or society A is better than society B. There's something about the fact that when we see the goods being more evenly distributed, that there's something better, even if it turns out that there's, on balance, less happiness. Okay, so that's supposed to be a challenge to Act-Utilitarianism as well, because it delivers the wrong result here. It tells us that society B is better than society A in terms of happiness and all the rest, and that's just wrong. Okay. Let's turn our attention now to rights constraints. It seems like there are certain rights that we have to take very seriously in our efforts to promote our own good or the good of others. And that gets captured here in this rights case. So imagine a case, it's a medical case. Imagine a case where a healthy patient goes into a clinic where there are physicians and surgeons and the like, and he's being treated for alcoholism, but his organs, by and large, are in great shape. But suppose there are 3 dying patients in this clinic. You see where this is going to go. Well, it looks like if we were to, or if the surgeons were to, or the surgeons' hench people were to, take the healthy patient, harvest his organs, thus killing him, and then perform transplants on the dying patients, that there'd be a net greater level of happiness than if we let the patients, or they let the patients who are dying die. The Act-Utilitarian, remember, tells us we got to maximize the happiness, right, in every circumstance. So the way we can maximize happiness in this case would be, that's right, by killing the healthy patient, harvesting his organs, and using his organs to save the 3 dying patients. And it's argued, in this case, so much the worse for Act-Utilitarianism, because that's the wrong result. You can't just kill the healthy patient in order to promote / maximize happiness. So it looks like Act-Utilitarianism is in trouble with respect to the rights constraint. There's also promising constraints, says Timmons. It's just part of our ordinary way of thinking about things, and promising constraints pose a significant challenge to the Act-Utilitarian position as well. Once again, we're given a case. Now suppose, I'll use myself as the example, suppose that I make a promise. My friend's dying, he's on his deathbed, and he tells me, make sure that my inheritance goes to my daughter. She's too young now to know what to do with it. When she turns 21, when she comes of age, please give her the money for me. And you agree to do it. You make the promise. Okay, but suppose that my friend's daughter ends up striking it rich. I see that money sitting there. My friend's daughter is now 21, and I think, gosh, that money could go to great use. I'm thinking like an Act-Utilitarian, perhaps. I start thinking, gosh, if I give that money to the local hospital, I can promote more happiness. I can bring about more happiness. Because look, the daughter's already rich. Right? We all understand the law of diminishing returns here. So suppose I were to give the money to the hospital instead, as the Act-Utilitarian would claim I should do. I'd be able to maximize happiness by doing so. Well, Timmons argues, and others following Timmons would claim That's the wrong result. You made a deathbed promise, Jeremy. And so given I made a deathbed promise, it looks like I'd be obligated to give the daughter of my friend, my deceased friend, right, what's rightfully hers in this case. So much the worse again for act-utilitarianism. So hopefully we're in a good position. Hopefully we understand the deontological constraints, both the justice and rights variations of the deontological constraints, and then here the promising constraints as well. Let's now turn our attention to the demandingness objection to traditional forms of act-utilitarianism. So when it comes to demandingness, the idea is that, big picture, is that act-utilitarianism requires too much of us, at least intuitively speaking. As you probably had a sense, a lot of what's going on here relies on our considered judgments as we reflect on certain cases and what the act-utilitarianism would require of us. And we compare that with what we think the correct verdict in the cases is. So when it comes to demandingness, there's two different kinds of demandingness objections. One involving thinking about the supererogatory, and the other involving special obligations we have to, say, our loved ones, for example. Let's talk about those in turn. But in order to explain what the supererogatory or the supererogation demandingness objection is, let me explain what the supererogatory is. So ordinarily, we think that in our moral lives, we can follow morality by doing that which is right. We can do what our duty is. We can do what's right, obligated of us. But we also think that we can do morally good in a way that goes beyond just doing what our duty requires of us. In other words, we think that we could do things that go above and beyond the call of duty. Or we think that we could put our lives, right, at risk. In fact, we could sacrifice our lives in order to save others. And we would think that when we did that, we did something that approximates doing the best. Not just doing what's required of us, but doing that which is best. Or at least doing that which approximates doing that which is best. So the idea here is that in the moral domain, we think that there are actions that would correspond with doing our duty, but we also think there's actions that correspond with doing what goes above and beyond duty. And that domain of going above and beyond duty is the domain of the supererogatory, the domain of supererogation, the domain of the heroic. So here's how the supererogation demandingness objection goes to act-utilitarianism. Traditional act-utilitarianism tells us that we're to maximize the happiness of all those beings, of all those humans, perhaps animals, that are affected by our actions. But by claiming that we have to maximize happiness, it's claiming that it's obligatory to do that which is best, or that which approximates the best. So what we thought was supererogatory, what we thought went above and beyond the call of duty, looks like act-utilitarianism is saying is in fact required of us. It's obligatory. So there's a collapse here in thinking about these different domains of the moral life as we were just doing a moment ago. We thought that, pre-theoretically, we thought that there's a domain of the obligatory or duty, and then there's a domain of the heroic, of that which goes above and beyond the call of duty. But if act-utilitarianism is correct, that distinction collapses. And the supererogatory, as I like to put it, it's crowded out. Crowded out by the obligatory, crowded out by our duties. The challenge, the objection is this. looks like act-utilitarianism gets the wrong result, given our considered judgments. We do think that there's a genuine distinction between our obligations on the one hand and the heroic and the supererogatory on the other. So in that way, act-utilitarianism, it's claimed, is too demanding. It demands us to, when we act, do the best, or at the very least, approximate doing the best. But that seems like now it's demanding us, requiring us to do something that we intuitively think goes above and beyond the call of duty. The second demandingness objection, the second way of formulating or running a demandingness objection to act-utilitarianism, at least based on Timmons' work, involves thinking about special obligations, the obligations that we think we have to our loved ones. So we think that we have special relationships to others, and those then incur special obligations. So special relationships that we have to our friends, our family members, others, they bring about special obligations. Here's the thing. Traditional forms of act-utilitarianism seem to deny this. They claim that at bottom, fundamentally, our obligations are agent neutral. So the fundamental principle of utilitarianism, act-utilitarianism, is maximize the happiness of all those who are affected by one's actions. And the idea is that that's an agent-neutral obligation, meaning that it makes no essential reference to any agent. All of us have to do it. All of us have to live up to it. Moreover, if you find yourself in a situation where, and here I'm going to use some trolleyology to help me. Some of you may know what trolleyology is. It involves thinking about trolley cases, of course. If I'm in a situation in which I'm zooming along in a trolley, I can't stop, I can go left or right only. On one side's my mom, on the other side, 5 strangers to me. An agent neutral view would tell me, hey, I got to promote the happiness of all in an agent neutral way. I got to kill my mom in this case. Because the general duty, or the set of duties in the theory, make no essential reference to agents or special obligations or the like. So the thought would be, look, this is counterintuitive because it seems like there's at least some pressure to say that in the case that I just devised that involved my mom, in the trolley case, that I should save my mom. Or at least I have some powerful reasons that I could put on the table that involve saying, I should save my mom in the case. Some of those involve saying, she's my mom. I have that special relationship to her. So a view which would have it that special relationships then confer special obligations is known as an agent-relative view. A view, or the way the challenge to act-utilitarianism here is supposed to go, is that our ordinary thinking about ethics has it that there are agent-relative obligations. There are these special obligations that utilitarianism, act-utilitarianism in particular, can't account for. So ordinary moral thinking is such that there are agent-relative duties that make essential reference to agents and their special relationships, the special obligations that they have to others. How does this relate to demandingness? Well, it's supposed to relate in the following way. It's far too demanding an ethical theory to require of people like you and I who create special relationships that we have to think about those individuals as if they're just anybody. But if you think about them in agent-neutral terms, right? That's far too demanding. It's perhaps psychologically impossible to get us to live in such a way. Now, it may not be, but I'm trying to press home why this notion of special obligations poses a challenge, a demandingness challenge to act-utilitarianism. So we've seen two different kinds of challenges to act-utilitarianism, those based on deontological or duty-based constraints. And we've also seen demandingness challenges to act-utilitarianism. If you have any questions about any of this, be sure to comment below or otherwise get a hold of me. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.